Okay, so we'll start the class right now. So yesterday we were talking about the um, LR1 parser. We just started the LR1 parser. Um, we said that including a look ahead item in the item set can actually uh, go a lot of distance. So now you can see the grammar on the southeast corner, as you can see of this whiteboard. So there is the augmented rule S prime producing S, and there are three rules: S producing capital C, C producing small c capital C, and capital C producing small d. So these are the three rules of the original grammar and an augmented rule as well. So we have started with the construction process of the go-to diagram or the DFA yesterday, and you can see the complete DFA which I have copied from the book. We have already seen some of these actually, like we have already done these, 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 and we have already done this as well. So one thing which we noted is that if you look at state number I6, which is right here, this guy, and state number I3, which is right here, as you can see, they are having exactly same first item. Only thing which is different is the look ahead item, that is the second item. In I3, the second item is C or D, small c or small d, and in I6, it is basically dollar. Okay, so um, so these two states, if it was a simple LR grammar, a simple LR parser, then I3 and I6 will be combined into one state. Whereas here they are two separate states because they differ in the look ahead item. You can see some more examples of that, like for example, state I9 and right here and state I8. They also differ in the look ahead item. That's why they are two distinct states in this LR1 DFA. In fact, in LR0 DFA, they will be basically the same state. Similarly, I4 and I7, these two are also distinct here, and right here. Again, the look ahead item is different. Okay, so that's about it for the LR1 DFA. Now, let us construct the canonical LR table or the LR1 table, which is shown in the northeast corner, as you can see right here, right here. So just like LR0 or SLR1 parsing table, it has in the row side, it has lots of states, as you can see. These states correspond to the DFA diagram we have just done on the left-hand side. So there are 10 states in all, starting from 0 to 9, and they have the action and go-to parts. So action part refers to the terminals and go-to parts refers to the non-terminals. So in state 0, you can see if you follow the go-to for S, it goes to state 1. So in state 0, go-to for S is 1. In state 0, go-to for capital C is 2, like this. Similarly, in state 0, action for small c is nothing but S3. That means shift and then move to state 3. So that is how many of these shift entries are populated in the LR1 table. Now, what about the reduction rules? Okay, here there is a little difference. So in SLR1 parsing table, what we did is that whenever we had a dot on the right hand side of a particular item, that means we have seen the whole right hand side of a particular rule, we applied the reduction process. And the reduction was basically using that particular rule number. Like, for example, if we had this kind of a rule, like S producing CC, and if we have a state where there is an item which is like this, S producing dot, CC dot, then we call for the reduction, and if the rule number is 1, then reduction would be R1. Okay, that entry would be R1 basically. Now for LR0, we said that for all terminals, we will be having that rule as reduction. In case of SLR1, which is a little different from LR0, we applied this reduction only for those terminal symbols which are in follow of S. Okay. But here, there is a little difference. Since we have already included the look ahead item in the item itself, why not use it? So, if you see a dot at the end of a particular item in a state,
if a look ahead item means?
The look ahead item is basically the second part of the item. You can see that each item in LR1 item set is basically a combination of two things. One is the one which is exactly similar to LR0 and followed by a comma, and then you have the look ahead symbol, which is the look ahead item. Okay, so it is a combination of two items basically. In LR1 item is a combination of two items. One is exactly similar to the LR0 item, and then we have the look ahead symbol or look ahead item included. Okay, that is what we are talking about. We are emphasizing this point. That's why it is known as LR1, because each item has one look ahead item. Am I clear? Like you can see, like in I9, you have capital C producing small c capital C dot, comma, dollar. Okay, so dollar is the look ahead item. So when we apply for reduction, we don't really look at the follow symbol anymore because the look ahead item is already included. Why not use it? Like, for example, if you look at state 5, there is a rule, there is an item where the dot is at the end, like S producing CC dot. So, of course, we need to, at state 5, we need to call for a reduction. For what are the symbols? As you can see, for the look ahead item symbol, which is already there, and that is for dollar. So, in I5, state 5, you can see we are calling for the reduction with rule number 1, which corresponds to the item S producing CC dot. Right here. Right here. Similarly, for other rules as well. Like, for example, you can see in state 9, under dollar, you have R2. Right here. Because I9 has something called capital C producing small c capital C dot, and that is including the look ahead item dollar. So under dollar we are having R2. Similarly, in state 7, you can see rule number 3 is called for as reduction rule, and that is for the dollar symbol right here. That's about it for LR1 items and LR1 parsing table construction. The parsing process is exactly same as in LR0 or SLR1 because they only consider the parser parsing table. So once the parsing table is constructed, the action is absolutely similar. So we'll consider this as the kind of an introduction to LR1. Of course, there are many issues which we did not talk about. One of the biggest problems with LR1 is that you can see, just like if you remember NFA and DFA, like in NFA, you basically, from NFA to DFA, when you constructed, you basically created a set of the a superset of the sets for each transition in NFA. So DFA used to have more states. Similarly, for LR1, you can see that for the same item, just because the look ahead symbol is different, you can get many states. So LR1 also has a tendency of exponential explosion. So the number of states in LR1 go to diagram would be much higher compared to LR0. So that means if you want to implement LR1, of course, it is much more powerful, but then it comes with an additional cost of more space and time requirement, which is not feasible for practical parser generators. So in order to avoid that, a third type of parser is implemented. Unfortunately, we are not going to talk about that because of lack of time, and this is known as LALR. The beauty of LALR is that it is more powerful than LR0, but almost of the same power as LR1. This is the first thing. And second thing is the number of states in LALR is same as LR0. Even though it is more powerful, almost as powerful as LR1, the number of state does not expand exponentially. It is almost same as LR0 set. Okay, please note that. So that is why LALR is much more preferred compared to LR1. There is another tricky issue here, which I am not going to discuss at all, probably, is that how do you construct LALR?
family ছিল
So in LALR, what generally...
কি করছে ডিফেন্সে এসে
Pranay, can you please mute yourself? Pranay, can you mute yourself?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so here what happens is in LALR, these I6 and I3 will not be two separate states. They will be the same state, but the look ahead item would be included. So you can say that by constructing LR1, you can get LR1 by combining states which differ only in the look ahead item. But then it defeats the purpose. Then you are actually constructing LR1 first, and then only you are merging some states to go to LALR1. That is not a good approach. There is a very interesting approach which is much more involved to construct the LALR set of items, which take almost the same as LR0 item construction and produces a more powerful parser. Now, this is the approach which is taken by Bison, but unfortunately, we don't have the time to go into the details of this, so I'll just skip that. But please note that this important information that LR0 is less powerful than LALR, and which is less powerful than LR, but quite powerful. But the number of states is same for LR0 and LALR, and the number of states for LR1 is much higher. Please note these things. that is good enough for our understanding. So right now, this is where I'm stopping the parsers. We are closing the chapter on parser, and we'll be going to the next one. We are supposed to go there from the beginning of today. Unfortunately, we are a little delayed. Okay, this part I am not recording because I have some interesting materials which I'll be sharing with you tonight. Up to this will be your syllabus. So this part is known as runtime environment, which is going to be, I think, an easy topic for you because you already know a lot of this material from your programming classes. So it will be a nice recap, I would say. And of course, some new knowledge would be gathered also. Up to this will be your class test syllabus, which you are going to appear between 21st and 23rd December. On 23rd December is going to be your compiler exam. So you will be expecting some questions from this topic as well.
Sir,
Huh, bolo?
can you please upload the detailed syllabus for the internal into the classroom?
Yes, I'll do that. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Now, this is one thing, and another thing is I'll be sharing the material. So I'll take, I was supposed to take today's class and next week's Tuesday class to complete this, but I may not be able to do that given the smaller time. So it might be that on 15th, we might actually meet. The routine says that we are supposed to meet offline physically, but I think none of us are really interested in that. So what we can do is we can meet in a regular class in online mode on 15th, which is next Wednesday, complete the syllabus on that day, and maybe the remaining time we can use up for question and answers regarding the internal. Okay, some tips and things like that. Tumra, have you seen the routine? I mean, have you seen the notice which was sent, I think, by Dean of Studies or something like that, or assistant? Let me check who sent that. Let me see.
স্যার বলছি থিওরি ক্লাস তো অনলাইনেই চলবে তো আমাদের পুরো সেমিস্টারে?
হ্যাঁ, but I saw some notice. I can't remember who told me that.
Actually, sir, I think that was particularly sent to faculties.
আচ্ছা।
স্যার আমাদের ওই রিলেটেড নোটিশ পাইনি, আমাদের শুধু দিয়েছে ক্লাস টেস্টটা অফলাইন হবে এই নোটিশটা পেয়েছে, আর কিছু নোটিশ পাইনি।
Okay, because this routine is valid till 14th of December, right? You know that, right? So, but we have a class on 15th. So what I suggest is we'll just take the 15th class normally. Okay, that's it. So we'll discuss, we'll complete the syllabus for first internal, or not first internal. There is only one internal, I guess. So we'll complete the syllabus for the internal test, and then we'll be discussing some finer points for the exam maybe, or any other question you might be having.
Sir,
yes.
Sir, after the internal class will be online or offline?
It is not yet known, because after the internal we will be having a 1 week break, and after the break classes will start from 3rd January, I think, if I can remember properly. Now, whether it will be online or offline, we are not sure. Okay.
Sir, what is the probability?
My take on 4th year is that it's probably going to be, I think, almost 100% we can say that it is going to be online, because you have the gate coming up and other things are there. So I don't think management will be very interested in you to bring to the campus and, I don't know, face the risk and things like that before your gate is over. But after your gate is over, I think it might be quite, your physical presence may be required, like regarding your lab exams or theory exams and things like that. That is my take on it. So I think by after middle February, you might be, I mean, if things go like this, you probably will be attending the college physically. Okay. But I doubt in January you will be required to do that, unless there are some things like semester lab exam or things like that. Okay, which I am not sure when it will happen. Am I clear? Yeah. Okay.
Sir,
So let
can
us.
you repeat the last part? I could not hear properly.
Yeah, basically, I'm saying that I think most probably you are not going to be required to come to college in January. Okay, for attending the theory classes. That's my point. I think. Although
Okay,
it
sir.
might be different for different years. Okay, maybe for other years it is not so important, but for your year, since gate is there and you are busy with lots of things, I'm not sure that you will be asked to come and join physical mode for theory classes. Yeah,
Sir,
that's my point.
sir,
Yeah,
sir, when our project mentoring will be started, you had any information?
project mentoring. What is
Yes.
that? What is that?
No, sir, means that final year project with the discussion with the teacher, with the faculty assigned.
That was already done during these physical classes. We are supposed to do the lab, and then the other half was meant for that. But I doubt anybody has used it.
Yes, sir, that's the problem.
Yeah, that was a mistake a lot of people made. But anyway, I can't really say a lot of things about that. I doubt anybody has done it. Okay, enough. I have talked about. So now I'll be going to the last topic for our internal, which is the runtime environment. And I'll see it is a nice, easy topic, but very important one. So I'll be just starting it in a minute. Okay. So can you see runtime environment? Can you see the slides?
Yes, sir.
Okay, fine. Okay. So what is runtime support? It's an interesting question. I mean, I think a lot of you did not really understand how the computer is behaving as far as the internal storage, memory, etc. is concerned when you started programming in C first. Okay. But then you have seen there are lots of problems you faced where you actually had to look up a little bit into how C organizes memory. Okay. That's basically the runtime support. So what happens when a program is loaded in memory? What happens when an external function is called? What happens when a library is called? What happens when the program crashes? What happens when you allocate more memory than you can? What happens when you access some unauthorized part of the memory? So you have seen all these things. Also, what happens when you call by value, call by pointers, and things like that? How does the function calling sequence know that where to return after calling from a particular context? How does recursion work? So you already know a little bit of this runtime support provided by various programming languages. Now we are going to extend that discussion a little bit, but it will be mostly a recap type of thing. But very important part, because after learning this, you should be thoroughly clear about how a particular compiler behaves in terms of managing the associated storage. Okay. Without this, you won't be able to write good programs at all. So that is where there is a big difference between programmers and engineers, because engineers, when they write programs, they know how to write it in a very efficient manner using the or utilizing the storage and other computing resources most optimally, which is not possible for an ordinary programmer who is just looking at the syntax or the algorithm. Okay, that is the application side of the programs, but internally how it interacts with the system is very important. So what you have learned so far in some peripheral manner, I would say, is something you should recap and see where you actually need to focus. So what is runtime support? It is not enough if we generate machine code from intermediate code. Interfaces between the program and computer system resources are needed. So need to manage memory. So memory management must connect to the data objects of the program. So all the variables you declare in your program, you know that they all become storage areas in memory. Programs request for memory blocks and release memory blocks. We have already seen that, malloc, calloc, etc. Free also. Passing parameters, very important. Here we will be focusing mainly on memory. So compiler must do the storage allocation and provide access to variables and data. This is a very important task. It's not only going to produce machine language, but needs to allocate resources for the runtime support. So what are the three main things? Basically the stack allocation, heap management, and garbage collection. What is the stack here? Can anybody explain me? What do you mean by stack here? Yes? Anybody wants to explain what stack I'm referring to? Is it the hardware stack I'm referring to? Or what?
Sir, your question is not clear.
My question is, when I say like a compiler needs to manage a stack for the programs written in that particular language, what do I mean by that? What kind of stack? Where is that stack? Why is it needed?
In a RAM.
Okay. No, of course it would be in RAM, but who manages it? Is it hardware or is it something?
OS.
Okay. So basically it is the system stack, right? That's what you are
Yes,
saying,
sir.
right? Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely correct. So it is basically the system stack. So where you will be maintaining that thing for certain purpose. Can you tell me what is the main purpose of stack allocation?
For function calling.
Good. As Shanks said,
Rupok, sir.
oh, it is Rupak, I'm sorry. It is really important that we keep track of the context of function calling. So if you have a programming language where I won't say functions, but I like to use the term procedures, which is procedural in nature. So you basically have a chain of procedures to complete the task. It might be that one task calls a subtask in a nested manner, and this nesting can go on at many depths, many level of depth. Okay. So if you want to use some kind of a data structure, of course, you need to keep track of the recent mode context where the function call should return. Of course, a stack appears to be the best choice, and you are correct. Okay, so stack is a very important part, and as we see, it is not even the OS stack. It is a stack which is maintained by the language itself. Okay. Of course, it can interact with the OS stack. For example, you might be having a language on a OS which supports stacks, but that language does not have a stack facility. In that case, you won't be able to use some of the features of procedural programming. Okay, what do you mean by heap? What is a heap? Let's see, Pranay. Pranay, do you know what is a heap? What is a heap?
Sir, heap is a data structure which consists of a one parent child and the two. It is the two child, one root and two child, and there is two type of heap. We see max heap or min heap.
Okay.
So in the max heap, the child value should be less than the parent heap, and in min heap, the child value should be greater than the parent heap.
Very good, Pranay. Thanks. Yes, that is the data structure you have already read. It is kind of a complete binary tree with certain properties. Okay, and what is heap used for? Because we know that accessing heap for various operations is very much time bounded. Okay, you can create a heap in order n, and you can actually search for an item in log n time. You can do the sorting in n log n, and these are like always possible, like best case worst case, etc. There is not much difference, something like that. Okay, when we talk about heaps in programming language, like in programming languages, you always use heaps. Okay, like to use the term heap. When do you use the term heap? Anybody can explain? When have you seen the term? Like, for example, when you are coding in C language, where have you used the term heap? No data structure programming, just ordinary C programming.
Maybe in the swapping purpose.
No, not swapping purpose, but
So
like
memory allocation.
exactly runtime memory allocation. Whenever you are doing, instead of statical memory allocation, you are doing dynamic memory or runtime memory allocation, like malloc calls, for example. You said that you are actually allocating from the heap. Okay. Now, please note that this heap in programming language context is nothing but some kind of a storage area, which has certain properties, but this need not be a heap data structure. So please note that. Don't confuse the heap data structure with the heap segment in a compiler. Okay, please note that. Garbage collection, I think all of us know it. Okay, so you can see how the storage organization looks like in general for a programming language. For example, C, Pascal, they all have this kind of thing. There is a code area, there is a static area, there is a heap area, and there is a stack area. The stack area and heap area grow towards each other. That is basically the dynamic part of the memory, and you can see that is known as free memory. So when stack requires, it can grow upwards to access part of the free memory and use it. Similarly, heap can grow downward and access memory. Now, you can see that, okay. So basically, they reuse the same free memory area because these two things are very much dynamic in nature. So if you have a lot of function calls, the stack will be growing to some depth. Similarly, if you have lots of dynamically allocated variables, you will be using up a lot of free memory. That's why we always discourage variables which are allocated runtime and not used anymore. We always say that please free them up so that they can be garbage collected. Some programming language have automatic garbage collection, some don't. You have to force it. So accessing free memory dynamically is always an issue. And you have already seen that when you dealt with pointers in your programs, like you used two-dimensional array dynamically and things like that. And lots of times you ran into the core dump or segmentation fault kind of error. And you have, some of you might have tested also, like if you are trying to allocate memory for a program which requires a lot of memory, like traveling salesman or knapsack problem, then many times you have seen that after certain number of n, you actually get no more memory available kind of error, which is very common on this kind of OS like Linux and Windows. So you cannot actually compromise on that. Like you cannot have a memory intensive program which keeps on allocating memory without freeing. Starts at certain point, you will be reaching the limits. Okay, look at the static area. Why the static area is there? Can anybody tell me? Why do we have a static area?
So to store the variables or blocks of code which will be common for all the instances of a particular class or something.
Absolutely. So if you are having things like external variables or global variables, these are prime candidates of static storage, okay, which can be shared between different modules, different functions, okay. So they are a separate area compared to heap. Even though heap is a common area, the allocation happens locally inside a function, but static allocation is available throughout the program. So from anywhere inside your program, you'll be able to access some kind of static resources like a static array or static pointer or something like that. And we have already been told that using static variables actually harms the modular approach, and they are correct because it increases the coupling between or dependency between modules. So a change in that static area can cause disaster for various modules which might be using it inadvertently. Okay. But sometimes we have to use static variables and static functions, etc., static methods, etc., which are shared basically. So code and data area in memory. So there is nothing much to be talked about. Static versus dynamic allocation. Please note the term carefully because in one point of time we'll be using it in our discussion of language comparison, which we'll be doing shortly. So static is compile time, dynamic is runtime. So if you have a global variable, note that the compiler allocates it. It's not allocated after runtime, means you don't have to load the program to get the allocation. It is done once you compile the program itself. Whereas if you have a dynamic memory allocation, like automatic variables or pointers, they are done at the runtime. Many compilers use some combination of following: stack storage. So stack storage for local variables, parameters. Heap storage is for that data that may outlive the call to the procedure. So heaps, one important usage is that it can be accessed even after the context from which it is allocated is gone. So for example, you might be allocating something from the heap area inside a function, but when the function call returns, that area does not go back to the free area. You have to explicitly free it. So that, in other words, means that you can actually return an allocated variable from a function to outside the function context. So that is the beauty of heap. So heap enables dynamically allocated variables to be available everywhere in your program, but you have to be careful about managing that storage. Okay. So if you don't free it up before your program terminates, you will be getting leaked memory. As I said, OS, like there is no way C can tell the OS to garbage collect something which it has not freed up. And I think many of you have run into the problem when you have a malicious or buggy programs allocating memory, and after some time your system might have crashed because of that. Stack allocation is a valid allocation for procedures, since procedures calls are nested, and stack is an excellent example of last in first out structure which can handle nesting very elegantly. Okay, I think all of you know parameter passing methods, call by value. Okay, so call by value, only a copy is created. So the changed
Yes,
value.
sir.
Yes, Pranay.
No, it's okay, sir. We know.
Okay, so C actually uses call by value, I think you all know. So any change you make in a variable, the change is not reflected in the calling function. So it has caused a lot of grief for you, I am sure. Like you have tested with your first swap function where that has happened. and then you change it to pointers. But C does not allow call by reference. So you can see an example of a problem with call by value. So node inserted by function P, a copy of P is created. So it's not the actual node. Okay. Call by reference is the one which is intended for reflecting changes to the calling function. It is the address of the variable which is passed to the calling procedure. Note that C does not support call by reference. C supports something called call by pointer, where you actually pass the address, pass a pointer to the, it's not the address, but a pointer to the variable. Whereas in C++, you have seen that using the ampersand operator, you actually can pass a reference to the called function. Okay. So C++ and Java exclusively uses call by reference. There is no call by value apart from certain primitive types. And also, I think all of you know why passing a, by passing a, like in a copy constructor, why you can't pass the, you have to pass a reference all the time. Okay, I think all of you know the problem of passing by value in such case. There is yet another one which is known as call by value result. It is a hybrid of call by value and call by reference. Let me see if I have any example of that. Yeah, so there is some difference between call by value, call by reference, and call by value result. Let us look at the examples first instead of going to the theory. So look at this program. Procedure Q, it increments A by 1. A is a global variable. Procedure R, it increases X by 10. X is passed as a parameter. And then it calls Q as well. So the main program, it assigns 1 to A, it calls RA, and then it asks to print A. This is some kind of a programming language. It's a pseudo programming language, you can say, but it's very similar to C and Pascal. So can you tell me, if the procedure R, which is passed an integer X, the passing is by call by value, then what happens with the print statement? I want the answer. So first, call by value. So call by value, what would be printed? A equal to what? This is call by value. What would be printed as the value of A? Can anybody tell me?
Sir, in which procedure, sir?
As you can see in the main, you can see there is a begin and end. You can think of that is the equivalent of main. So A is assigned the value A, then RA is called, then A is printed. So what would be printed?
1.
A is a global variable. No, it's not 1, because as you can see in RA, of course, R will not be changed, A will not be changed, okay, because it's called by value. But then it is calling Q, and Q is actually changing the value of the global A. You can see it is incremented. So it should be 2, right, Aditi?
Yes. But
Okay.
I wasn't able to understand that the Q procedure was taking it as reference.
No, Q is not taking at a reference. Q is using it as a global variable. That's what it is.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So there is an increment there. Okay. So A is 2 in call by value. What about call by reference? Just follow the logic. A is assigned the value 1, then RA is called. Here we are passing a reference, so value will be reflected, change will be reflected back. So what is happening? A is incremented by 10, right? So A will be 11. That is a change to the global variable as well. And then Q is called. So another increment will be there for 1. So it should be 12, right? Right?
Yes, sir.
A is equal to 12. Now let us see what is the value for call by value result. Okay. So actual parameter is calculated by the calling procedure and is copied to a local location of the called procedure. Actual parameter's value is not affected during execution of the called procedure. At return, the value of the formal parameter is copied to the actual parameter if the actual parameter is a variable. Okay, so you can see there is a little difference. That means we have a copy of A here. So this is not A, but we have a copy here. So X is getting the value 1 when it is invoked, and it is now getting the value 11. But then Q is called, Q increments A, so this is now 2. A is now 2. Okay. Now when R returns, this value of X is copied to A. That's what it means. So that means the value 11 is copied here. So I think the value should be 11. Let me see. Yes. So you can see in note, call by value result, value of X is copied into A when procedure R returns. That time X was having the value 11, so A becomes 11. So that change by Q is overwritten. There is another one which is known as call by name. Use of a call by name parameter implies a textual substitution of the formal parameter name by the actual parameter. Okay, so textual substitution will happen. So for example, Rxi. Begin I equal to 2, X equal to 5, I is assigned the value 3, X equals to the value 1. Now, if you call it by bj 2j comma j, then that becomes, instead of I, it will be j equal to 2. So bj start 2 is assigned the value 5. Then j is assigned the value 5. Then bj star 2 will be assigned the value 1. So X changes whenever j changes. Okay. Why? As you can see, there is no relationship between X and j as such, because j is passed as the actual parameter for the formal parameter I. But since it is a textual substitution, X becomes B2j. So whenever j changes, the second parameter changes, the first parameter changes as well. Okay. In this case, it is important because j is an index to the array. So if j changes, the element which is accessed is also changing. Can you get it? Am I clear?
Yes.
Please comment on this, if any of you. So X changes whenever j changes. So hence, we cannot evaluate the address of the actual parameter just once and use it. That means the array element indexed is ever changing. It must be recomputed every time we reference the formal parameter within the procedure. And there is something called thunking, which is used to evaluate the parameters. Thanking is a very interesting concept. I'll just avoid that. Okay, now we come to a very important concept known as activation of a procedure. Here you can see a quicksort program written in a very similar language like C. So we have read array procedure, we have a partition procedure, we have a quicksort procedure which invokes partition and quicksort recursively, as the case in general. Then the main function, we have the elements A0 and A10, and between we are doing the sorting. Okay, so 1 through 9 is sorted, A1 through A9. So so what are the procedures here? Read array, partition, quicksort, and main. And you can see inside quicksort, partition is called, and quicksort is called recursively as well. And in main, read array and quicksort are called. So this is the activation for quicksort. This activation tells you how the procedures are called and exited. So enter read array, leave read array, enter quicksort 1, 9, enter partition 1, 9, leave partition 1, 9. Then assuming the fourth element is the pivot, then enter quicksort 1, 3, ... leave quicksort 1, 3. The recursion.
So what is the leave means? Leave keyword means?
Exit. This is not part of C programming language as such. It is some kind of a pseudocode, you can say, just to explain how the sequence of activation happens for this quicksort program. Okay.
এখানে অ্যাক্টিভেশন বলতে কি বোঝাচ্ছে? আপনার মানে কিভাবে সর্টিংটা হচ্ছে?
অ্যাবসলিউটলি। তোমায় আমি বললাম যে কুইকসর্ট 1 to 9 এর উপরে তুমি রান করিয়েছো, যেভাবে স্যার দেখাতেন। কি দেখাতেন? যে যে তুমি এরকম দেখলে যে Q1, 9, assuming the pivot element is 4, then what will happen? You will call Q1, 3, right? And then you will call Q5, 9, right? These are the two branches, right? Then in Q1, 3, again you will do something. In Q5, 9, you will do something like this. This is how the branch occurs, right? So basically you call it and return from. Leave means kind of return, you can say. Return from quicksort. Okay. All right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So this is represented by something called an activation key, the tree. As you can see, Q19 calls Q19, then it calls Q1, 3, then it calls Q5, 9. Q13 in turn calls P1, 3. Note that these are not traversed in a level order manner. These are always traveled in a depth first manner. Okay, so Q19 calls P19, then calls Q13, then Q13 calls P13, Q1, 0, Q2, 3, like this. And then only when this branch is finished, Q19 calls the right branch, which is Q5, 9. And then the tree grows below that. So the activation sequence can be represented by the concept, by the structure activation tree. Control stack. Okay, so this is the absolute term. It's not really a OS stack, not really a system stack. This is not really a hardware stack, but a control stack which is kept by the compiler itself, by the runtime storage of the compiler itself. Okay, so the flow of control in a program corresponds to a depth first traversal of the activation tree. That's what I was telling about right now. Starts at the root, visits a node before its children, recursively visits children at each node in a left to right order. So we can use a stack called a control stack to keep track of the live procedure activation. So what is the idea? The idea is that you push the node for an activation onto the control stack as the activation begins, then pop the node when the activation ends. Then the contents of the control stack are related to the paths to the root of the activation tree. So you can see what is the configuration of the control stack. So here you can see nodes from the activation tree have been reached when controls enter the activation Q2, 3. So you have start, then you call read, then you call Q1, 9, then you have the left branch P1, 9, which is exited. After that, it calls Q1, 3. Then it visits P1, 3. Then it goes to Q1, 0. Then it goes to Q2, 3. Now you can see the path from Q2, 3 to Q1, 3 to Q1, 9 to S is the active control. Those which are dotted means their execution is complete. The solid lines are the path of real activation or current activation. Now, we should be asking some of these questions. Should procedures or could procedures be recursive? This is a very good question to ask, because the moment you apply a recursive syntax in your programming language, then you have to be extra careful, because how do you know where to return to? If you have multiple functions, you know the exit and entry points are very well defined. But if you are calling the same function over and over again, the entry and exit points may be the same. Only difference is the value of the parameters passed, right? Am I clear? Am I clear? This is how recursive procedures work, right? In fact, you might have faced the same problem when you face the computer architecture course. How is recursion implemented in hardware? In software, similar problems are there, because the exit and entry points are same. Because the code is same. Only difference is the value which is passed. What happens to the, second issue is what happens to the values of local names when control returns from an activation of a procedure? We know that in C, all the local or automatic variables are overwritten. Okay. And interesting problems happen because of this property. But it is not true for all programming languages. Like I'll be giving assignments for certain programming languages. You have to devise some compilers where you will see that local variables outlive the function context. Can a procedure refer to non-local names? It's a very important point. Non-local means doesn't mean globals. Non-local means, can I use some kind of a scope operator to refer to a variable which is defined in a separate function? Like in C, you know, all functions are at the same level. Okay. But there are languages where functions can be nested within each other. It's not a nested in terms of calling. It's a nested in terms of declaring the function. So you cannot call B unless you call A, because B is nested in A. This kind of thing can happen in a programming language. Pascal is a very good example of that. In C, that is not a problem. How are parameters passed when a procedure is called? We have seen some examples. Can procedures be passed as parameters? This is a very big issue, and I think even though many of you are masters of C language, you may not have fully appreciated the powerful feature of functions passed as parameters. Can procedures be returned as results? This is even more tricky. I don't think C even supports that, but some languages might be supporting this.
Sir, when we design a compiler, we have to take care of all these, whether the procedure can return result or not.
Absolutely, because you are designing your own runtime structure. This is a very important part of compiler design. Till now, what we have seen is that we have focused on the syntax of the language and the tokens it can parse. But the very thing which next comes is, how are you handling all these features when you are allocating them in runtime memory? Okay. So if you have a language like Fortran, for example, Fortran doesn't allow recursion. Fortran, there is no concept of stack. I mean, I'm talking about the basic Fortran. Now they have advanced version of Fortran where all these features are included. So all the primitive languages, you can say, which were there, the first generation of languages, they didn't support recursion because the compiler developers or designers did not include stack support. That's the only reason.
Yes, sir. So, sir, generally, which is the confident language to write a compiler?
I would say till 10 years back or 15 years back, it was C. But nowadays, Python and Java have overtaken. That's why I'll be giving some assignments in Python and Java. Unfortunately, I haven't completed the set of assignment till now. I'll be doing it shortly. There should be, you should be getting that very soon, and we will be having almost till end of January.
Sir, actually, one body per group assignment submission is okay. Hello?
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Yes, sir. It would be best if all student, if all member submit assignment.
Right.
At the different time. Yes.
Okay. Then you have the dynamic storage allocation. Now that is a very big issue. Not only it's a dynamic storage allocation. Do you want to expose memory to the programmer? You have seen in C you can do you can mess with the memory. You can allocate memory and then you can put some garbage into it. In Java you cannot do that, even though you can allocate memory dynamically. Can storage be deallocated explicitly? That is another important thing. Okay. So in Java, you actually just put it to null. But in C and C++, you can free it up. If you don't free it up, in fact, it will not be garbage collected at all. Okay. That means you will have leaked memory. So lots of issues are there because compiler, runtime support, and OS, as somebody pointed out, interact in a very close, I should say, handshaking manner. So if the language supports allocation from system memory, but then unless it is freed, it does not allow the OS to garbage collect it or the language, the compiler itself to garbage collect it, then that memory is leaked forever. Okay, and that means if you have a buggy program which is running for a long time and have some leaks, that means what? After some time, all memory will be leaked and the system will crash. It has happened. And it has happened with me. It has happened with lots of you, I guess. In production environment, if it happens, that's a big disaster. But it has happened in production environment as well. You know, allocation of threads. Threads is a very important resource. You can allocate millions of threads and not much checking is done. So if you keep on allocating threads without checks, you can easily crash the system. So what is an activation record? After all this background, we come to the very important concept of activation records. Procedure calls and returns are usually managed by a runtime stack called the control stack, as we have already seen. Each live activation has an activation record. I just explained what is an activation. This is also called a frame as well. The root of the activation tree, that is the starting procedure, is at the bottom of the stack. So you can see how does a general activation record structure look like. Actual parameters, returned values, control link, access link, they will be explained in a while. Saved machine state, this is very important. Saved machine state means, yes, anybody can comment on that. What do you mean by saved machine state? Status, sorry. Yes? What do you mean by saved machine status? Yes? What do you mean by machine status? Yes? Anybody wants to comment?
No, sir.
Yeah, it could be actually the registers. particularly things like the control register, status registers, processor status register, for example. Okay, so these are very important things. Local data, temporaries, you are creating temporaries and going away after the function call returns. So local data is also part of the activation record. So temporary values arise because of evaluation of expressions. We'll see more of temporaries when you talk about intermediate code and machine code generation. Local data, I think all of you know what is it. Field for saved machine status holds information about the state of the machine just before the procedure is called. Things like program counter, machine registers that have to be restored. I think all of you have done microprocessor programming. So in microprocessors, when you did machine level programming, you called procedures. The first thing you did was push all the status registers into the stack. Remember
Yes,
that?
8085, we have done that.
Yes. If you forgot to do that, your program is garbled. Okay. So that is something you learned there. So same thing here. So the moment you want to enter a procedure, you have to save, you have to do some housekeeping about the current context so that you can return to it safely. This is easier said than done. I know a lot of people whose bread and butter is to make it better. Optional access link. What is access link? It used to refer non-local data held in other activation records. So this is an important field. Generally, in C, you don't see this thing, but it is a very important thing in designing your programming language. If you want access to non-local data to be available, for example, in a language like Fortran, access links are not needed because non-local data is kept in a fixed place. So anything which is non-local is in a fixed place, so you can easily look at that. In Pascal languages, you actually need access to non-local data. C doesn't have that facility. So that's why you won't see that in C. In access link or something known as display, I'll be explaining that as well. We can use that. Control link, again, that is another optional field. It points to the activation record of the caller. Why it is needed in certain cases will be clear to you as we go forward. Now, the actual parameters field, it is where the parameters are supplied by the calling procedure to the called procedure. And similarly, the field of the return value is used by the called procedure to return something to the calling procedure. Okay, so now we come to static allocation and dynamic allocation. I think I'll stop here because this will go on for some time. So next week on 14th, we'll start from different types of allocation, basically static allocation, dynamic allocation, and in dynamic allocation, what are the things there? So we'll see some important aspects of like nesting and stuff like that. About heap allocation. I'm not sure if all of these will be needed. I generally go into lots of details, but not sure. Then we'll go to the scopes, what is meant by static scope and dynamic scope. That's about it. So I think by 14th, we should be able to complete the syllabus, but then we should be doing a little bit preparation for the exam. So I think I need a class on 15th, but let's decide that on 14th.